I'm going to ask them to begin a passionate kiss. I will videotape it. I will pipe in different types of music to see if that changes the intensity of the kissing, etc., etc., etc. Please begin the passionate kiss. Hopefully you can see the problem with that as well. The advantage is that I have all the control in the world now. I can manipulate the lights, I can manipulate the music, I have all the control. The disadvantage is that I won't get to see natural interaction because they're not used to making out in front of a two-way mirror. Let's hope. So laboratory observation, advantage control, disadvantage not natural interaction. Okay, moving on to the second way to gather evidence or test hypothesis is a case study. A case study is an in-depth focus on all aspects of a single person or situation. So say that I was working with a client and it's a fascinating case. It was really interesting. I take really good notes. I make some really good interventions. After we're all done, I ask the client with their permission, let me publish this, and they say yes. That would be a case study. Sigmund Freud used nothing but case studies. He would meet with clients and help them through their issues, take notes, and then he created his theories based on those case studies. A case study is used when experimenting is impractical, unethical, or impossible. Basically, a case study is a scientific anecdote or a story. So, impractical or unethical. Say that I'm researching dissociative identity disorder. You probably know it as multiple personality disorder. So how would this work? I go up to a couple who's just had a child and say, excuse me, I'm researching multiple personality disorder. May I borrow your child for, say, about 18 years and subject them to chronic severe abuse to see if they develop multiple personality disorder? I'm sure you can see the problem with that, too. It'd be a tad bit unethical and definitely impractical. So with something like multiple personality disorder, all the research is based on case studies. And it's noted that multiple personality is one of the most controversial, if not the most controversial, diagnosis we have because the research is so poor. One of the reasons why the research is so poor on the situation is the only thing you can do is use case studies. And once again, a case study is nothing more than a scientific anecdote or story. There's no experimentation, no cause and causality. It's just a story. Okay, moving on to survey methods. This is the third way that we gather evidence or test hypothesis. A regular survey is an interview or questionnaire used in public polling techniques to answer psychological questions. The problem is that the information from surveys may be inaccurate or biased. So, first off, a survey is simply an individual or a panel of individuals sitting around thinking, okay, what's some good questions to ask on a survey? So to show you how inaccurate it might be, if I did a survey on blue jeans and I asked you, how many blue jeans do you own? Could you answer that accurately? Well, let's say that you have 2 pairs of jeans that don't fit anymore, that are out in the garage in a bag, and you're just waiting to give them away, and they've been out there for a few months. Would you count those? Well, most of you would say, no, I wouldn't count those. But the question was, is how many pairs of blue jeans do you own? Well, you own them. So that's just a really good example of how surveys tend to be inaccurate. And they're biased also. The information can be very biased. For instance, research on sexual behaviors and drug use. We know for a fact that one of those areas, the surveys tend to get back really skewed information. Could be very exaggerated, or it could also be very underrated. I'll let you figure out which one is which with that. Now, there's a better type of survey, and that's called a clinical survey. A clinical survey is a thoroughly tested and researched survey. Basically, and this is important to write down, with a clinical survey, Research comes up with the questions, as opposed to a regular survey where a person comes up with the questions. So it's important to keep in mind that a clinical survey, it's the research that generates the questions, not the person. You need to know an example of the MMPI. Oops. All right, so I don't have that in here. And I hope you don't need me to spell MMPI. Let me tell you what the MMPI is. You need to just be aware of it. You don't need to know it. You just need to know that the MMPI is a good example of a clinical survey. MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, it's the best well-known personality inventory that we have. It was created by two gentlemen from the University of Minnesota. First thing they did was get a panel of experts together, and they agreed that there's 16 different facets of personality, or traits, if you will. One trait is the antisocial personality. Antisocial in psychology means to be against authority, to rebel against authority. So the criminal element is the antisocial personality trait. So they went to a prison and they got 50 prisoners to write down everything about themselves. Then they took all that information and made a really long checklist. It was like about 500 word or 500 question checklist. Then they went to another prison and they had 500 prisoners check off all the items on that checklist that applied to them. Then they took all of those checklists back. The questions that were consistently marked off, and I mean like 98% of the time were marked off, they kept those questions. The ones that are inconsistently marked off, they didn't keep. So they went from like 500 questions to about 8 questions. But those 8 questions were really reliable questions on the antisocial personality disorder. So they did the same exact thing with all the other different traits, depressed individuals, schizophrenic individuals. So they came up with a very good inventory. And that was the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory, which is a clinical survey. Hopefully, from that example, you see that it was the research that came up with the questions, not someone sitting behind a desk, but the research. Okay, the last one I want to talk about is the experimental method. This requires that you have an experimental group and a control group. The experimental group receives the treatment. The control group does not receive the treatment. They are used for baseline